Good afternoon, good morning to all of our attendees, and welcome to Reforecasting Demand, Sales Territory, and Quota. I certainly hope that you're in the right room and excited to see our newest configurations of Workday Adaptive Planning. Not sure if you saw, but earlier Neil was on Mad Money yesterday, speaking specifically about operational planning and the different use cases of adaptive. A software presentation just wouldn't be the same without a safe harbor. Customers who purchase Workday should make decisions upon services, features, and functions that are currently available. But that being said, everything you see today is available for purchase. And I commit to you, if we do cover features that are not, I will call them out specifically with either a roadmap item or a safe harbor statement. By way of introduction, these are our hosts today. I am represented there on the right. My name is Zach Vigil. Please keep in mind that this picture was taken well before quarantine and my hair is not nearly as tamed, so no camera today for me. A little bit about me, I was an adaptive customer for 5 years in a warehousing capacity, sales capacity, and then finally an operations capacity. They were smart enough not to get me admin rights or access, but I was an end user, and I'll go a little bit more into that here in just a little bit. On the left-hand side is really the star of the show, Joseph Dank. Joseph, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute just for a second and introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zach. As you mentioned, my name is Joseph Dank. I am the Principal Practice Lead for Planning and Analytics at Active Cyber. I myself have been working with the Adaptive Insights technology for a little over 6 years now, and we've implemented some amazing use cases as far as FP&A as well as true corporate performance management goes. On the previous slide there, just to talk a little bit about who we are as Active Cyber. We are a premier platinum partner of Adaptive Insights. And I also proudly like to mention that we did win the fiscal year 2020 Global Accreditation Partner of the Year Award. We have lots of amazing clients as well. And what that really means for you all is that we're able to bring lots of great experiences and information to any implementations we do with you all.
Wow, Joseph, I honestly was taken aback. I didn't know that. I mean, congratulations. That's a big announcement. And were you just saving that for this webinar? So that's great if you did. Congratulations to you and your staff. I know you guys worked really, really hard on that. So yeah, that definitely in order and well deserved. Thank you for that introduction. So
Thank
here's
you.
our meeting objectives today. Essentially, I'm just going to go through these point to point. If you have any other questions, of course, feel free to put them in the questions box. So overview, what is adaptive and how is it helping companies very similar to yours achieve their planning and budgeting goals? Right below that, we have managing your customer journey. Now that you're live, what's next in the deployment strategy and what business goals are supported in the solution? Integration. It's very common to have customers with 3 to 5 different data sources of all shapes and sizes, and knowing how they interact with one another to create a better planning cycle is crucial in one's growth and being more strategic and less of a data jockey. Now, our goal is to lead customers in developing an integration strategy that is scalable, maintainable, and replicatable, and that'll be part of our conversation today. Below solution design and integration, you have planning use cases. Now that we know what adaptive is and how it works, we can move on to the different configurations of the platform, i.e. sales, operations, workforce. And then really, with all the boring stuff out of the way, we can start the demo where we actually go through and being led click by click, what is adaptive insights in the operational sphere? Before we get started, I'm going to launch just a quick poll about your knowledge of adaptive. Don't worry, you don't have to prepare for anything. This isn't a test, but essentially, how familiar are you with the solution? So I log in daily, I'm a super user. I log in occasionally, but not a frequent user. I'm aware of the solution, but I've never used it personally. I don't know the solution, and I didn't know we're customers. What day is it? I haven't left the house in 5 weeks. And just to provide a little bit more color on that, I was a casual user, so I'd go in there on a monthly, quarterly basis when my CFO and my director wanted a little bit more information around my revenue stream. Okay, that poll has been launched. I'll give it a couple seconds here to go ahead and fill out the role that best suits you. And I would say most of our interactions are going to be either with that super user or that casual user that know either a lot about adaptive and rely on it for, daily reporting or, pivoting or course correction, or that infrequent user, more of that casual user. I know adaptive, but I don't know how it's built, and I have no real influence on how we would go forward. Like, how do we build and maintain the model? Okay, there we go. There it is. Just to my assumptions, we have super users and occasional, not frequent users. Only 1% represented the day about we didn't know customers. What day is it? I haven't left in 5 weeks. Also 1%. Okay. Well, thank you very much just for that. And we've got a couple more polls, so as we continue, feel free and kind of get ready for those, and I'll preface those. Thank you. For those customers who are familiar with adaptive, looks like by and large most of you do, this will look similar to your model and aspects that stand out as either achieved gates or challenges or processes that are currently being implemented. For the attendees that aren't aware that your customers or maybe even casual users, this is just a typical financial deployment strategy. And I'm gonna read through there just real quickly on the phase one, so that top line there. So you do it for, you use adaptive for your annual budgets, maybe a weekly flash. It's owned by a core bunch of finance team. It's not necessarily too broad in terms of, cash flow or balance sheet or revenue, maybe more CapEx and income statement. And then your data itself is either very singular in that it only has one data source, and it's manual, only has one data source, and it's an automated integration. But as you continue to grow and change and adaptive and leverage most of its core functionality, you're going to be able to go into strategic what if long term. Now it's given to the business owners, those that have the ability to spend, and bringing in balance sheet cash flow, so you have a real good temperature gauge of what your cash looks like on a daily or weekly basis. And then automated integration. We'll go into integration a little bit further, but HRIS or CRM or some other data source that you find appropriate. Now, how do we do that? How can we be so applicable to any number of customers, regardless the shape and size? And that really starts at the very bottom, which is our data integration framework. Rob Hall, famously, our co-founder, has been quoted saying that planning only works if it remains data agnostic. And that principle holds just as much true today as it did in 2013 when he founded the company. Now, using the framework and then really powered by EHT or Elastic Hypercube, your users can experience throughout all of the configurations of adaptive the same look and feel of a finance deployment or a configuration. It still provides the same technology, the same impeccable reliability and performance, all because it's built on the same framework. So moving up through the UI, so the user interaction, now what is adaptive good for? At the end of the day, it's good for everybody. Today's market or today's reality is that everyone is planning, and be it sales, operations, HR, or IT. And the reality is that everyone is planning, but in their own bubble and in their own or on their own desktop. And this really inhibits the planning process and causing broken and fragmented business decisions, because everyone has their own final version 3.5 of some revenue scheme or maybe even a project-based model that then gets up to finance, and then finance has to make some type of sense of all the information and bring it into your COA or chart of accounts. Speaking of departments, love to learn a little bit about what department you represent today. So the first step that we had was understanding what is your level of familiarity with adaptive. Now, what department do you represent? We've got IT, sales, finance, sales operations, or systems? And while we're getting those answers, I know it may seem a little repetitive when we got sales and sales operations, but sales really are the transaction process. So they're the staff of the workforce that is going to customers and selling, versus sales operations that really free up the sales staff to do kind of their bigger and better work. And an operation standpoint, it could be quota, territory setting, course correction, maybe even bringing a revenue model or TAM into the financial market to understand who we're selling to and to what degree. Again, and sales is more of the people that are behind the scene or on the front lines selling to the customer, selling your product to customers. Give it a couple more seconds here. Looks like the poll is done. 80% of finance. Okay, that's not completely surprising, because we know that we were kind of born and bred in finance, but we do have some IT and sales ops here as well. So welcome. We'll make sure that we do talk about really the sales operation side of things as we go into our demo. Now, as we just saw in that previous poll, these are all the different departments that are represented. And then within Adaptive, you have the ability to really plan scenario version prior to going to finance. Typically speaking, finance was at the very top in a hierarchical order, with sales, HR down below. Now we've seen in the last year that it's more of a universe. So you've got your business there in the center, and then every business unit is going to be a different segment, and they all interact with one another, and they're more of a level playing field in terms of strategic plans and execution of your business goals. Today, we're going to be focusing on sales planning, territory, quota, capacity, sales forecasting. I apologize, we have 2 more polls and we'll be done. So we want to make sure that we're very cognizant of what you'd like to learn mostly about today. Now, I know that most of our audience is finance, but in terms of the sales and sales operations, what would you like to learn more about first? In essence, this is our blueprint. Love to know where you'd like us to go in order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hopefully that we get through all of them today. So we have quota setting and tracking, territory planning and management, integration, so that's internal or external. Oh, and it does look like we have our first question, Joseph. So if you wouldn't mind coming off of mute while I read it. So in terms of integration, when we talk about external or internal data sources, can you describe the value of integration?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Of course, when we're thinking about corporate performance management, one of the biggest pieces of this are the decisions that we're actually making through our planning processes. So what that means is to have a very high fidelity plan. We really want to make sure that we have all the data and information needed to make a well-informed, data-driven decision. We want to remove as much of the emotional quotient of it as possible. And so, there was an interesting, I think, here we mentioned internal or external. So, when it comes to external data, there's a lot of valuable stuff. Most of you probably have an integration or at least doing manual imports from your ERP. But then also, here we're thinking about CRM data, our bookings. Where are our opportunities in those Salesforce stages, for example, if you use Salesforce? We're thinking about potentially data warehouses or data lakes like Snowflake, for example, that gives us additional operation details. And then we're also talking about, of course, being able to data share or data exchange between what finance needs or what constraints finance is inputting, as well as the outputs and the inputs from, for example, our sales operations team that led them to their plan.
Great, thank you. And we have a follow-up question, and it's about Workday. Can we bring in information if we're not a Workday customer? Does it matter on the data source?
Great question. Yeah, and Zach, as you mentioned previously, we are extremely data agnostic. And by that, I mean that, in my past 6 years with Adaptive, I've integrated to more source systems than I can even name, to be honest with you. And even after the Workday acquisition, none of that changed. The only thing that may have changed with integration is that they built a better, stronger integration with Workday as to what was previously there for integrating with Workday, but everything else is also still extremely easy. And as long as there's a way to get the data out of the system, we can absolutely integrate to it.
Wonderful. Yeah, if you can snag it, we can plan it. Wonderful.
Better
Thank you.
said.
I love little quotes like that. Well, we have our marching orders. It looks like we've got at the very top integration. So we're going to be talking about integration first, just to give you a little bit of heads up. So this isn't scripted. We're really taking the lead from our attendees today. We want to make sure that we're following really the orders that you've given us. So we've got integration, volume, demand, quota setting, and territory. I do apologize for the back-to-back polls here. What we also want now, kind of narrowing the focus again, every one of our configurations of either sales or operations, supply chain, IT, have a different flavor or vignette of planning. And depending on what that industry is, it can look different. So are you SaaS, manufacturing, nonprofit, government, business services, utilities, oil, gas? Now, one that isn't represented here is retail, or maybe some general business category. Feel free just to pick one that closely aligns or maybe closest aligns with your business today. Because again, we want to make sure that we're mindful of your industry and that we can show you configurations that really match your industry. What I would be remiss if we had an opportunity to show you something that's an exact copy or maybe a mirror of your organization, and we didn't. Okay, some information's coming through. It's kind of a horse race here between SaaS and business services. Okay, so business services and SaaS just squeaking out there with manufacturing coming in third. Great. These are, we're lucky in that we have a solution that's been very pertinent today with course correction and reversioning. I think our versions have gone up 4 or 5x week over week, and those are really the industries that have been hit probably the hardest, and we'll make sure that we cover some of that. Now, I am done. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And Joseph, I'm going to ask you to come off mute. And
Absolutely.
I'm going to change over.
That is a beautiful background, Zach.
I try. Sorry, apparently Mac is a little more nuanced. Very good. Hey, we got it. I told you it wasn't scripted. If it were scripted, we didn't have the awkward pause in there. That would be very strategic. Great. Well, I can see your screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. If you'd like, I think based on what we saw in the polls, I think it was a little bit varying between what exactly everybody wanted to see first, as well as kind of who's here from an industry. So, Zach, unless you want me to pivot somewhere else from a starting point, I think maybe we can start here. And what I'll just reiterate are some of the comments that we already made on integration that I really love about this. And so again, whether that's pulling that data from an external data source, I love that we can bring it all into here. And since most of you are actually from the finance team, those of you that were interested in volume demand and maybe even business services or on the manufacturing side, this may particularly capture interest for you. And that's when we think about what we need to do from a demand planning and even full S&OP side of things, the structure of the way that needs to work is quite different than the structure that you've implemented in finance. But of course, what you don't want to have to do is take all of those Excel spreadsheets and figure out a way to get it to match up what you have in finance. And the point of saying that is really just to show you this drop down. This is what really takes us to the next level when we think about corporate performance management. It's allowing you all in the finance side of things to say, here is our top line revenue target for the year. S&OP team, what are you seeing from your demand forecast? Do we have any problems in our supply chain? Give us some what if analysis on our standard costs. Where do you think we're going to land? And then easily being able to send that information from your S&OP instance directly into the finance instance to seed your FP&A budget. I think that's a really huge concept that adds a lot of value for our users that are doing, for example, S&OP or even any of the other types of quota, capacity, and territory that we'll also talk about today.
Great. Joseph, sorry, we got a question.
Yeah, please.
Software is notorious for acronyms, so I feel like sometimes we're a government agency. But we have a question around S&OP. What does that stand for?
My apologies, I should have never used that acronym. It stands for Sales and Operations.
Okay, very good. No, thank you.
You're welcome. And then maybe to just show a little bit more of that as well, and we'll keep this kind of high level. Of course, we're here to show you more for those of you who may be more interested, but what I'm looking at here is actually a view of last year, what our units volume was and what periods that fell in, and this year, what we're forecasting. So we're starting off just forecasting the same amounts as last year in this example. Of course, this would be more configured to exactly your needs in real life, and it may start off with an uptick or a downtick or anything like that. But the example I really want to show here is how easy it is to plan some of this. So let's say, for example, finance, you all are saying that we definitely want to see at least a 3% uptick total company-wide across the board, regardless of SKU, location, etc., next year. So what that means is you all may have entered that information into another sheet in FP&A where you've done your what-if scenario analysis, etc., and then that information would be communicated all the way here for your demand planners, where when they log in, what they're actually going to see is this first starting point for them that shows this gap now as to what they need to hit and compared to what they did last year. So that's from the simplest level. From there, what we typically move on to is perhaps, putting in our promotion schedules and maybe some of our price demand elasticity measures, and also continuing to do adjustments along any of those major intersections, as well as working our way down the rest of the way in the supply chain to make sure that there's no issues or risks to hitting that number.
So we do have a couple of questions, and thank you for that. And they're around integration, which we've already taken from the poll, which I know is a kind of a top of mind interest. Sorry to take kind of a step back, but first off, what integration strategies do you have to maintain integrity? So that maybe the different types of integration options that are available to customers, and then kind of the best practices around that.
Got it. So when we think about, I guess I'll kind of start with best practices. And there always has to be a bit of a process discussion, right? What that means is we need to understand when the data is needed, when the data maybe is refreshed in the source system. There's all types of considerations like that. So in order to maintain that fidelity, et cetera, we really need to have kind of a process discussion, how your systems process data. And then from that point, we have a lot of different options for actually handling the data as well. Some of those options are, for example, a number of the pre-configured connectors we already have, the ability to make JDBC connections, or even to create custom API connections with JavaScript. And then, once we get the data ingested, we have the ability to transform that information as needed in order to get the data into the system in a way that's going to be very useful for you. So I know I kind of responded to that a bit high level. Zach, do you feel comfortable with my answer there?
Yeah, and
there's a lot of details we could get into. Yeah.
Yeah, right, especially with integration, and talk about a minefield of more acronyms. But
Yeah.
just we got one question, and it's a follow-on to that, which is, so you talked about an or an external data source, SQL Server, JDBC, CCDS, all of those APIs, all the different types of external. But what's new to adaptive is this internal, so adaptive on adaptive. Can you walk through
Mhm.
really what's changed in the last 6 months or so since they've introduced that functionality?
Yeah, a lot has changed. A lot of our clients, in fact, I'll even venture to say the majority of our clients have at least one, I'm using air quotes, adaptive on adaptive connection, or we call this adaptive as a data source. What that allows you to do is easily communicate information, maybe from one adaptive instance to another, or even, inside of an adaptive instance, maybe moving data from one place to another to remove the need for manual exports and imports or manual inputs of different types of information as well. So that was just a major change. And some other great things. I'll just mention one more thing is what this also allows us to do. One major problem that we used to hear in the past from clients was, great, but as we make structural updates in adaptive, and I think most of you are kind of super users, so I feel comfortable using these terms, but structural updates like levels or chart of accounts or dimensions, attributes, etc. Now we have to actually go and make those changes inside of our second instance as well, where we're doing sales planning or sales and operations planning. Great thing about adaptive as a data source is you don't have to worry about that now anymore. Using that integration method, we can actually automate those structural updates so both of your instances constantly stay on the same page without you having to manually make those updates.
Right. And before, the question is, before, what was the solution? What was the way or the practice around connecting instances, or could we?
Okay, yeah. So we did. There were a few options that we were able to do, which would allow you to send data almost from, so for example, here, this is a child instance, and this would be a parent. So you could send data one way. It wasn't bi-directional, and
I
you
see.
kind of receive the data in an aggregated manner. And then after that, there was a new update that came out which allowed us to basically send information bidirectionally to maybe only a model sheet, but there was no ability to perhaps transform that data before it landed in its new spot. So what adaptive as a data source will allow you to do is it gives you obviously full and complete flexibility into the level of aggregation, granularity, as well as any potential transformation needed before it lands in its new spot.
Great. Last question here in finance before we get back to volume demand is, we know inbound, but what about outbound? So as we start to report, what options do we have for exporting, or is it all in system?
No, you have lots of options for exporting. We can absolutely, in the same way, and I didn't mention this, but inbound integrations, we have the ability to set them on a cadence. For example, maybe it runs every hour or every night, as well as an ad hoc button that you can press to pull that in on an ad hoc basis. The same capabilities are there for external, for pushing data out as well. Whether that's set on a timed cadence or you want to be able to just hit an ad hoc button to send the data out, we absolutely can. Again, we may send that to a data warehouse like Snowflake, or we may send that some information to a CRM like Salesforce to update your territories. There's many different use cases for being able to do that.
Great. Now, we're in dashboards right now, and I know that active dashboards is a new feature that was released just recently. The questions are around printing the dashboards or sharing dashboards. Is that an option, or what options do we have around sharing now kind of this visual representation?
Yeah, great question. So the primary method is, of course, being able to just share with your users that are already inside of the adaptive system. So You can give people the ability to edit or view or both to this particular dashboard if they have a license in Adaptive Insights. You can also generate snapshots, for folks, which basically is just a point in time picture of what you're doing here. And then also, if you're looking to just communicate information as well, Office Connect is one of my favorites. You can automate the information to Excel, to PowerPoint, to Word documents, and then you can easily just save those as a standard Excel, PowerPoint, or Word and email that out to anywhere in the organization.
Great. So I think that the sharing capability is also new with active dashboards as well, correct?
Maybe not. Maybe I'm not sure exactly the question. So you were always able to share the dashboard perspectives?
Yeah, that I'm educating. I need to learn too. That's great.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
no worries. I'm sorry. I didn't know if I understood the question a bit
No,
wrong.
that was just my curiosity. I appreciate. You're so kind though. You're like, I don't know if that's necessarily right. That's good. Okay. So one last question. Looks like we have another question on integrations. The type of file, is it a database or API, or can it be really anything?
Yeah, it can really be pretty much anything. Again, happy to talk with you if you have a specific file type you're interested in, but I still haven't met a file type that we weren't able to utilize. So
Great. All right, well, let's move on. And I feel like we're probably going to have more questions around integration. I'll kind of sprinkle those in as I feel appropriate. But let's move on to the volume demand. So really starting to do the fun stuff where we see the propagation of the information to the system. I think people are really interested in seeing something like that.
yeah, sounds awesome. So, again, here, what we've done at the moment is we've gone ahead and given a total company increase of 3% across the board. We're seeing what that looks like against our last year actuals here. And then we're also seeing, which is, what I really like, is being able to see on a week by week basis, perhaps, what our previous volume was, how much is due to that 3% uptick, and then what our now consensus volume is for the weeks. All of these dashboard dials that you're looking at here are also clickable. So what I mean by that is, as you see me hover over this, we see that the true number is 3,897,139. But I can also click directly on this, and for example, get show me that broken out by finished goods. So now I'm able to see finished good one is actually 577,000 of that demand, and the majority of our unit sales, or demand rather, is coming from finished good one, and able to see the other tiers there. And I can continue clicking on this and drilling into this information, maybe breaking out that demand by quarter. We clearly see a spike or a seasonality is largest in Q2. We can continue to do that to answer our questions in a really user-friendly and intuitive manner. And one more thing, and I'll take a pause here, but then of course, Zach, as we move to the next stage, which for some of you, you may not do it by the finished goods next, you may look at it by product groups or colors of products, sizes, whatever that is, no worries. We can then go ahead and make our next point of adjustments, and we still, just like before, have all of our history here as well to help allow us to help understand how we should make those adjustments and where we should make those adjustments, or where perhaps we need to dig in a bit more.
Oh, great. This looks really good. And so typically when you talk about like a deployment strategy and those tabs that are on the top where they kind of bucket all of your dashboards, have you seen maybe the top 4 or 5 that almost every company uses? And do they vary by industry as well? I'm sure that they do, or is it just really the order of priority?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it hits on another big point. What we're talking about here is really how do we plan in our organization, but also in such a way that matches to our corporate strategy. I bring that up just specifically because we may perhaps in our organization have a strategy to sell more finished good 3. right? So what we actually may want to do is have different tabs that are helping us understand who is buying finished good 3, you know, what types of marketing initiatives are working around finished good 3, and those types of things, so we properly allocate dollars and plan to better hit our corporate strategy. So that's a long-winded way of saying that these tabs really differ by customer, but the majority of people at a minimum will at least have, you know, again, an overview, a place where they can review and make adjustments from a total company perspective, at least one other intersection that they're really interested in adjusting, and then being able to make perhaps very granular adjustments to specific maybe SKUs at a specific location at a specific point in time. Then of course it's important to convert that to a production forecast. So this will always be here. Even if we're not including our procurement teams into the planning process here, we almost always have an inventory management spot. And then of course we want to make sure that we're appropriately planning our labor here as well. So those are the main ones. Of course, we always usually see things like what if for technology purchases and things like that as well.
Great. Now, just spending a little time on Active Dashboard, some of the new features that have been, you know, that came out recently, would you be able to go into one of your sheets or dashboards and kind of do some manipulation so we can see real time some of those dials change?
Absolutely. Cool thing about this is just like any of our other dials, right? We can kind of pop this out to get a bit more information here. We can always pop out this sheet as well to see the screen that we're making inputs with, to understand them a bit better. And then just to make, you know, an adjustment really clear, I'll just do something wild. I'll increase this by 3,000% or 30,000 rather. You're just typing your information directly into this input sheet instead of navigating to the sheet in the traditional way that we usually do that from our quick access menu. And as soon as you hit the save button, you're basically seeing all of your dials update right there in real time. We can see that because of that 30,000% increase over here, we're getting a big old spike right there. So it really speeds up planning, right? You know, sometimes having these the ability to visually see and represent the information and the effects of your plan, as well as even having conditional formatting here that calls out something you may want to reconsider, right, is obviously extremely powerful for speed and accuracy of planning.
And I think you mentioned it, it's the data entry point. And I know Active Dashboards now is kind of that vehicle, or maybe even a translation piece to non-finance folks to start speaking finance. So if you can lead them directly to an intersection of data of input, you don't have to worry about them kind of navigating where they shouldn't be going. You know, you're kind of coloring by numbers now, or paint by numbers, which I know is going to be really great and fantastic for those that maybe aren't as familiar with Adaptive. So a question's coming about dashboards. How do I know that I have active dashboards or not? And if I don't, how do I get it?
Excellent question. If you hover to your quick access menu and you see this that says dashboards, you have active dashboards.
Okay. And so the newest feature, how would they know? So if they have dashboards and maybe it's the legacy and they don't have sheets, how would they add a sheet to a dashboard and start doing some of that? And granted, you don't have to go too deep. I just want to make sure people have kind of the click path to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not seeing any of those features that we talked about, best thing to do would be to contact either whichever customer base account executive you happen to be working with, or whoever your customer success rep is, and they'll be able to help ensure that it properly gets enabled if it is part of your subscription, or they give you appropriate pricing on that.
Great, thank you. All right, well, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to switch gears a little bit to quota setting and what it looks like from a sales operation standpoint, because I do know that they're represented here today.
Absolutely. I am just quickly moving over right there. I'll pop open my dashboard here and we'll get started. There we go. So that dashboard is opening up.
Yep.
So yeah, here we go. We're looking at quota and capacity planning example now. And again, you know, this is where perhaps finance may have a high level target or something like that, and we want sales ops to say, how are we going to make this a reality? You know, one thing I actually forgot to mention earlier that's maybe a bit different from the finance side. Finance does typically do multiple what ifs and creates multiple versions, but we see that as being exponentially higher when we think about any of these operations use cases, like what we're talking about here, sales and operations, et cetera. You know, the reason for that is obvious. You know, we're thinking about our corporate strategy, our go-to-market strategy, and there's a number of different ways that we may be able to hit that number. So usually we're seeing people, when it comes to our quota planning, we're actually seeing on average about 20 versions per like quota setting process.
Wow, I wish I had a poll right here, because I'm getting a little poll happy. But understand, I wonder how many versions a typical finance or some of our attendees have spun up in finance. So, and I think you're right. So even at Adaptive, I know that last year we had 21 versions. The year before, I want to say it was high teens, so 17 or 18 versions. So I know it's very typical from a sales operation standpoint to have many. But if you guys are so inclined, the attendees, if you would like to put in the number of versions that you've had kind of in the questions from finance, and then maybe even from a sales perspective, that'd be really great just for us to understand, really the level of effort. We only know kind of our own world, and sometimes we get a little bit lost in it. But I'll share those results as they come in. But just to continue your thought, thank you. And I can already see on top, and I've not seen a whole lot of these, but on the top now, instead of having maybe different metrics or OKRs around production and product types and all of that, now we're looking at assumptions and staffing and reps and cost of plans. And I think that's to kind of interpret is when we talk about the types of dashboards that we have, it really depends on the industry and vignette of the planning process in order to get everything kind of aligned with your business goals. But now I see that, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'll get a little bit more into this in just a second, but actually on this topic, I wanted to call out one thing. I just mentioned creating a lot of versions. And so for you all, your power users there, what you've been doing is going to model management versions and then copying a version. The cool thing here is to make that easier. What we're actually able to do is just kind of hit this new version button, name our version, choose which version is our baseline, hit OK, and then it automatically creates a copy for us. It'll bring us to that new version right after we do that. And now we're right here, still in the same perspective, and we can make whatever those adjustments are for our new what if plan or version here. For example,
right.
Maybe we want to see what happens if we change seasonality.
And looks like you've hit a vein here, Joseph, because a lot more questions are popping up here. So around versions, the first one, is there a limit of versions that a company can have?
Excellent question. The first client that I ever implemented about 6 years ago, we stay in touch. He's actually became a good friend of mine, but we talk a lot, and he's actually, each month they do a reforecast. So, they're 1 + 11, 2 + 10, whatever. But then they also are doing what if scenarios almost every 2 weeks. So, about 3, maybe there's a neutral, a high, a low, to see kind of where they're floating in. The point of really saying all that is to say that he still has all those versions after 6 years. So you can only imagine how many versions there are. They're in folders, they may be hidden and locked, etc. But he still has all those, and he's still creating them, and he's still not going to get any pings about he's over the number of versions and needs to pay more money. So basically the answer to that question is there's really no limit.
Great. Now, question around accessibility of versions. The example is given if we were looking at an acquisition, but was a finance-led motion and didn't want anyone else to see it, how would, is that protected or is that core functionality?
Excellent question. So just like we have the capability to limit what intersections people may be able to see information or input information, through our levels, or if you're using dimension access controls via our dimensions and other intersections in our instance. We also have those same capabilities when it comes to versions. So you may lock down a version and allow anybody to be able to see that version, but not make any edits. You also can create user groups, which some of you probably have in your finance instances today. Create user groups that gives only a specific group of people the ability to even see a certain version. Or maybe, one group can see the version, but only one group can actually edit the version. So you have also a lot of flexibility on who can edit, who can see from a version by version perspective as well.
So I want you to, finish up the quota and maybe even setting, or maybe, interacting with one of the dashboards.
Yeah, so let's do this. As we can see, our target was 56.5 million for 2019. And as we can see here, we have no headcount delta. So what's happening here is through our different intersections, we are deciding how we're going to deploy that quota. And of course, that turns into almost a bit of a headcount. So what that means is that our deployed quota number meets our quota carrying capacity of our reps right now. So let's say, for example, we wanted to do a what if to say, I want to see if we can get this 10% higher. What does that look like? So I'm just keying in that 10% adjustment to our 2019 target. As I saved, you're going to see our dials update just like you saw before. The biggest difference now is that we now have a headcount delta of 8, and we have a top down versus bottoms up gap of 5.6 million. So now it's our job to figure out if we really want to hit this new $62.1 million goal, how are we going to make that a reality? Well, there's lots of great stuff here, similarly to what we just showed before, but a little bit of a different view. What I'm actually seeing here now from a starting point is, from an actuals perspective last year, what were those splits across our different regions or sales teams? Maybe our strategy says we want to focus more in the West, or we're seeing that start to uptick. We may also look at a number of different assumptions. How have we assigned our quota? What do we think is the productivity growth of maybe a particular segment? For example, it might be SMB, mid-market, or enterprise. We may see like a productivity growth in enterprise, just as a quick example, just keying something in. And it may be the same with attrition as well. And I don't mean to get off topic, but maybe one interesting thing just to quickly point out is that we do clearly see that organizations that have been using adaptive for sales operations planning have actually seen decreases in the attrition of their sales staff, as well as seeing less overpaid commissions as well. So that's another interesting concept. Maybe we might not have time to capture today. But then from that, we may move into planned staffing, where now we can take a look at what are our ramp schedules? How long does it typically take our reps to actually ramp? And let's make sure then that we perhaps plan for a new hire in a time period that's going to allow them to still be able to meet the quota carrying capacity goals that we potentially have for those individuals.
That's great. Now we've got a couple more minutes here before our launch, our last poll, but can you quickly go into territory assignment before we launch our last poll? And we do have a couple more questions that I want to get to, but
yeah, no problem. Let me just show like a quick example here. We talked a little bit about kind of shocks to demand, et cetera. So maybe what I'll just show is a little bit of how Adaptive will allow you to easily model some of those shocks, perhaps to demand, and what effects that may have on the territories that you've aligned there. So here we go. This is just pulling up now. One of the best ways we like to do this, oh, and by the way, I didn't realize this, some of you may not have seen the new mapping feature. There's quite a few things going on in the map right now. Let's just focus it into our Southeast territory for the moment. And so what we can now clearly see is where those Southeast territories are. It looks like it's Georgia and Alabama. But getting into some of those territory shocks, One way that I like to talk to our clients about modeling this is perhaps what's really going to happen with territory shocks, or one way to model that is, I'm sorry, not territory shocks, but demand shocks. One way to model that is our probabilities of closing deals are going to change, whether that's up or down. So let's just go ahead and just drop ours down for purposes of demoing here. And I'm just going to cut these down by a few percentage points here really quickly. So what that's going to do now is, now that we've done that, what's going to happen is our territories perhaps may become unbalanced. And what that means is we probably want to take another look and go back through our territory carving process again. So that's just a really quick example of how we may be able to model something like that, as well as being able to see our territories in a visually representative way. And so I know I might be going on a little bit here, but one thing to point out is that we can kind of see that there's a U.S. Georgia Southeast territory and a U.S. Georgia region right here, territory right here, and there seems to be a little bit of overlap. So we may want to take a little bit of a look at that. It may be because it's broken out by different segments like enterprise or SMB or something else, but visually being able to see and understand those territories like this definitely gives you a bit more understanding of how you've allocated those territories.
Great. So I'm going to launch our last poll while I ask a couple more questions. And it's really what's next for you guys. Now that you've seen some of the different configurations and use cases, I'm interested in X. What are we looking at? So either attending future webinars, so we continue this series on operational planning, white papers and other downloadable materials, personalized demo, so it gets much deeper. So usually those demos last about an hour and a half, and they go through every different aspect of that particular configuration. Or helping to get more out of my current instance. Maybe I'm not accessing as much. And while people are looking at this last demo or this last poll, feel free to put even any of your questions that we didn't get to in the question in the chat box, because all of these are recorded and we want to make sure that we follow up with you. At no time do we want to say that we're just kind of tone deaf to some of your interests, and I'd love it for you just to throw anything else that you're thinking there in the chat box, and we'll make sure to reach back out with you. It's either going to be someone from your CSM, so your customer success manager, or maybe one of our other representatives here at Workday Adaptive Planning. Okay, responses are rolling in, and we still got about 7 minutes. Hey, Joseph, now that we have this, I do have a couple questions that we didn't get to, so I'm going to try to get to those right now.
Okay,
So
excellent. Let's do that.
The next is going to be around our favorite access rules. So is there a way to limit access based on dimensions rather than levels or versions?
There 100% absolutely is. We've done that for a number of our clients now as well. I mean, short answer is yes, absolutely. This is always a great one where we probably want to talk with you a little bit more about your use case, just make sure that it's a really good fit for you. But that functionality is there.
Great. And I didn't see the poll results. I think I may have missed it, but 54% would be interested in attending future webinars. So in essence of that hub and spoke that we were talking about, we're going to go into the next chapter. That chapter is more than likely going to be led by this group here, what they'd like to see next. I imagine it might be supply chain or something like that. So we'll go into that topic on the next webinar series. 22% would like to get help out of their current model, and that can be done through a myriad of different channels, and that's either through a health check, your CSM, an optimization, training, a knowledge homepage, just a number of different things. 20% at white papers and other downloadable materials, and we do have a landing page for adaptive insights for sales, or Workday Adaptive Planning, that goes through basically the same function format, but maybe a little bit more of a conversational piece rather than more of a demo. And then last, a personalized demo. So 4% there at the end. But I appreciate everyone's time and energy today. Joseph, do you have any parting comments, concerns that we can address before hanging up today?
Yeah, maybe the last thing that I'll mention is just that, I think we're all really dedicated to corporate wide planning or corporate performance management from a holistic perspective. So what that means is that there are other things we haven't shown here today, as far as maybe how do you plan strategic initiatives or risk items? How do you maybe do some headcount planning for your workforce, or even skills planning, et cetera, as well as really a myriad of other types of planning use cases that we're able to implement to help you all get the true value and high ROI out of your adaptive insights investment.
Agreed. Yeah, we were here for an hour, and in an hour we had to had to go quick. Because there is so many different rabbit holes that one can follow that are aligned with their best practices in industry. So good point there. Well, it looks like we're nearing the top of the hour and the end of our time with one another. I do appreciate, again, your audience and your willingness to participate in the many polls that I've presented. So I thank you for that. Joseph, thank you for your time and your expertise. And again, congratulations on the award from you and your team in Active Cyber. With that will end today's call and today's webinar. Have a wonderful week and weekend. Goodbye.
Thank you.